His attorney leaned over and whispered 4 words. Not a sentence, not an explanation. 4 words. And Grant Halston, the man who'd spent 16 years telling me I was too emotional to understand business, went dead still. His smug smile didn't fade. It shattered, like glass. His fingers tightened around the pen he'd been so eager to use. And I watched his hands start to shake. Across the conference table, I did something I hadn't done in years. I relaxed, but I'm skipping ahead. You need the full picture, because this only makes sense when you understand how a woman everyone dismissed as just the wife turned an entire empire into a trap with one signature. My name is Maya Keene. I'm 33, and 3 months ago I was married to Grant Halston. 16 years. Long enough to forget what my own preferences were. Long enough to forget what silence feels like when it isn't loaded with fear. Long enough to become the person who kept everything running while someone else collected applause. I met Grant when I was 17. I wasn't a prodigy, I wasn't gifted, I was just tired of depending on anyone. I started working right out of school at a mid-sized accounting office, Caldwell & Co., as a receptionist, who also filed invoices because we all wear multiple hats here. By 19, I was doing payroll reconciliations and catching errors the senior staff missed. I had one talent that made people comfortable around me. I listened. I didn't perform, I didn't brag, I watched. Grant was 25 when we met at a charity gala, one of those events with champagne flutes and empty smiles. He was charming in the way men are when they're auditioning for power. He talked about his future like it had already been approved by a board of directors. I'm building a property group, he told me. Not just real estate, a legacy. I smiled and asked a boring question about tax compliance. He laughed like it was cute. That's how it started, him dreaming, me making it possible. We got married when I was 18. Yes, 18, which tells you everything you need to know about how quickly I learned to ignore my instincts when someone spoke with confidence. Our son Eli arrived when I was 19. And somewhere between breastfeeding schedules and bank statements, I became the person who could run a household on discipline and a half-empty coffee cup. Grant's business didn't take off right away. For years, he was just about to break through, just about to land the investor, just about to sign the development deal. And then at 24, I quit my job to help him temporarily. You already know how that ends. Temporary turned into 11 years of me being his everything. I handled vendor payments. I organized contractors. I negotiated lease terms. I built his pitch decks. I ran his calendar. I corrected his invoices. I rewrote his emails so he sounded competent. I even coached him before meetings. At home, I raised Eli, packed lunches, helped with homework, held parent-teacher meetings alone because Grant was closing something big. At events, I was introduced as Grant's wife, like my role was a decorative detail. And for a while, I accepted it because I believed in building something together. Then, slowly, the tone shifted. Grant started making decisions without telling me. It began with small things, booking trips, signing contracts, hiring new staff. Then bigger things, moving money, restructuring accounts, insisting that certain documents were above my pay grade now. He criticized my clothes, my lack of drive, my negative attitude. Negative? I was working 70 hours a week without a salary while raising our child and keeping our life stitched together. But sure, negative. Then, 3 months ago, he ended it on a Wednesday like he was canceling a subscription. I was in the kitchen, making the dinner he liked because I had trained myself to view effort as proof of love. He sat across from me with his phone face down on the table and said, "I've spoken to my attorney. We're divorcing." No apology, no hesitation. Then he said the part that still makes my jaw tighten. "I'm keeping the house, the business, and the vehicles. You can have custody. I'll be generous. I'm not taking Eli from you." He framed it like a kindness, like our son was a burden he was graciously leaving behind. I remember staring at the salt dish and thinking, this is what 16 years gets you, a business memo in your own kitchen. That night, I didn't cry. I couldn't, because I'd been preparing for this moment for a long time. Not because I'm psychic, not because I'm heartless, because 3 years earlier I had found something Grant never expected me to see. And once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. Before I tell you what I found, if you're the type who enjoys stories where arrogance meets consequences, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments what city you're listening from. I read them. I mean that. Now, back to the part where my life turned into a quiet war. Within a week, Grant began treating the house like it was already his. He moved my things into the guest room, He changed the Wi-Fi password, he canceled the joint credit card, and called it financial boundaries. His mother, Celeste Halston, arrived 2 days later wearing pearls like armor. Celeste had always smiled at me the way you smile at staff you don't remember hiring. She walked through my closet like she was inspecting inventory. "These are marital assets," she said, holding up a bracelet Grant gave me for our 10th anniversary. "We'll need to keep the valuable items secured." Secured. She packed my belongings into plastic storage bins. No labels, no care, just efficient removal. Like she was cleaning out a guest room, not dismantling a life. Then he brought her around. Not the first woman, not the last woman. This one was called Sienna Vale. 26. Worked in brand partnerships for his company, which is a fancy way of saying she took photos with hard hats in front of buildings she didn't understand. She walked into my kitchen wearing my robe. My robe. She opened my fridge like she'd been doing it for years and said, "Oh, you still buy dairy, that's brave." Grant watched her insult me and smirked like it was entertainment. And here's the thing about humiliation. It isn't just about pain, it's about message. Grant wanted me to feel replaceable. He wanted Eli to see me as temporary. He wanted the world to view him as moving on to something better. It worked. On everyone except the one person who mattered. Eli watched. My son saw his father wearing a new watch while telling him they couldn't afford a class trip. He saw shopping bags stacked in the foyer while Grant complained about tight margins. He saw the contrast between the image and the reality. And one night at my small apartment, a 2-bedroom with a kitchen so narrow I could touch both countertops at once, Eli sat down and said, very quietly, "Mom, is Dad actually rich?" I looked at him for a long moment. "What do you think?" I asked. He stared at the table, thinking the way only a child who's tired of being lied to can think. "I think he's pretending," he said. I reached across and squeezed his hand. "Then do what smart people do," I told him. "Wait. Watch. Don't argue with someone who's performing. Just let the performance collapse." My 15-year-old understood something 2 lawyers were about to miss. Now. 3 years earlier. This is where the story changes. It was late. Grant was working. I was reconciling accounts because no matter how much he tried to push me out, the numbers still came across my desk. I noticed a transfer I didn't recognize, then another. Then a recurring pattern, money leaving our main operating account into a smaller account I'd never seen, and from there into third-party payments with vague descriptions, consulting, special services, client hospitalities. I pulled statements, I cross-referenced. I did what I've always done, I followed the trail. And the trail led to a fact so ugly I actually laughed once because my brain couldn't process it any other way. Grant's empire wasn't an empire, it was a stage set. The house had 2 mortgages already, and he'd just signed a third. The business lines of credit were maxed. Vendor balances were rolling unpaid for months. Back taxes were sitting like a bomb. And the cars, every single one was leased in the business name with balloon payments due. We didn't own anything. We were renting a lifestyle. And the money, it hadn't gone into expansion. It hadn't gone into investments. It had gone into Grant's addictions. Not substances. Worse, approval. A secret apartment downtown furnished and paid for. Private club membership. Networking trips that weren't networking. High-risk trading losses. Luxury purchases that never came home. And then, buried in the payments, I found the thing that made my stomach go cold. A monthly retainer to a crisis management firm. A firm that specializes in burying scandals. Because Grant wasn't just broke, he was afraid. So I didn't confront him. Confrontation is for people who still believe the other person has a conscience. Instead, I protected the only thing that mattered. My grandfather, an electrician who never trusted shiny people, used to say, "Keep your emergency money where nobody can charm it away." I had my own retirement account from my old job. I had a small inheritance from my aunt that I'd never mixed into Grant's finances. And over the years, I'd quietly built a safety net the way you build a fire escape, without announcing it. I put it into an irrevocable education trust for Eli. Clean, legal, untouchable. Then I documented everything. Mortgages, loans, statements, emails, the retainer, the secret lease. I kept copies in a safe deposit box under my maiden name. I left a drive with my sister. I made sure that if Grant ever tried to rewrite reality, the paper trail would outlive his charm. Then I waited, because men like Grant don't leave when they're happy. They leave when they think they've found an upgrade. And when he finally demanded the house, the cars, the company, everything, he didn't realize he was demanding a mountain of debt. He thought he was taking the crown. He was taking the guillotine. When I finally hired my lawyer, I didn't hire someone nice. I hired Rosa Mendel, 51, sharp enough to cut steel, the kind of woman who doesn't blink in court because blinking wastes time. She scanned my binders and said slowly, "You've been sitting on this for years." "I've been building the exit," I replied. Rosa didn't smile often, but she did then, just a slight curve like she was impressed against her will. "Fine," she said. "Let's let him win." We structured the divorce exactly the way Grant wanted. He would receive all marital assets. And attached to the agreement in an addendum he would absolutely ignore was the liability assumption schedule. Every mortgage, every lien, every credit line, every lease, every outstanding vendor balance, every personal guarantee he'd signed in the business name that would now land entirely on him, in black and white, legal, proper, lethal. 2 weeks before the final hearing, Grant's attorney, Peter Caldwell, yes, the same family name as the firm I used to work for, called Rosa and requested a financial audit. Caldwell was experienced. He smelled danger. Rosa's voice was calm. "We're happy to provide whatever documentation you'd like." Caldwell brought it to Grant. And Grant, blinded by ego and pushed by Sienna, shut it down. "No audit," he snapped. "I built the company. I know its value. We're not wasting time. Sienna wants this over." Of course she did. The night before the hearing, Grant texted me, "Thanks for being reasonable. You're making this easier. 16 years of taking from me," and he was thanking me for not fighting while he stripped the house down to the studs. I replied, "I only care about what's best for Eli," which was true. Eli's future was already protected, and the man who tried to erase me was about to pay tuition and consequences. Rosa called that evening. Monday, 10:15 a.m., final hearing, Judge Elena Marwick. "Are you ready?" I looked at the cheap lamp in my living room, the thrifted table, the small kitchen I'd painted deep cobalt because it reminded me of calm water. "I've been ready for 3 years," I said. Monday morning, courtroom 2A. The building smelled like old paper and floor polish and ambition. Grant arrived in his best suit. Of course, he wore the navy one I'd picked for him years ago because I used to believe love meant shaping someone into their best self. His watch flashed under the fluorescent lights as he shook hands with Caldwell. Sienna waited in the hallway, scrolling through her phone like this was a dentist appointment. Celeste sat in the gallery with her posture perfect and her smile already celebrating. I arrived a few minutes later wearing a simple charcoal dress, hair pulled back, no jewelry. I looked tired, soft, small, perfect. Judge Marwick entered, early 60s, eyes that have seen every lie and stopped being entertained by them. "Halston versus Halston," she said. "I'm told we have a full settlement." Caldwell stood. "Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Halston is assuming all marital assets, the residence, the business, and the vehicles. Mrs. Keene will receive a cash settlement of $45,000 and shared custody." Rosa stood beside me. "That is correct." The judge's gaze landed on me. "Mrs. Keene," she said, "do you understand that you are relinquishing claims to significant property?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, voice quiet. "Are you being pressured?" "No." "You are doing this voluntarily?" "Yes." The judge's brow furrowed as if she wanted to protect me from what looked like a terrible choice. But I wasn't unrepresented. I wasn't confused. I was simply letting the wrong person feel powerful. "Very well," she said. "Proceed." Documents were passed, pages turned, pens clicked. Grant signed like a man accepting an award. I signed slowly, deliberately. And then Caldwell reached the addendum. I watched his face change mid-paragraph. The tiniest pause, a blink, a second look. Then he leaned in toward Grant and whispered 4 words. "This includes the liabilities." Grant barely glanced up. Yeah, everything. Keep going." Caldwell swallowed. "Sir, you are assuming all debts, personally." Grant's smile twitched. He snatched the papers and started reading for the first time that morning. The courtroom was quiet except for the soft rustle of pages. His eyes moved over the figures, and I watched the color drain from his face the way it drains from a man realizing the plane has already left the runway. Mortgage balance, secondary loan, third mortgage, business line of credit, vendor liens, tax arrears, vehicle leases, personal guarantees, then the summary. Net equity, negative. Grant's hand started shaking. He stood up abruptly, chair scraping. "This is wrong. She hid this. This is fraud." Judge Marwick's voice snapped like a gavel, even before the gavel moved. "Mr. Halston, sit down. These numbers are Caldwell cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable, and addressed the court. Your Honor, for the record, I advised my client to order an independent audit. He declined. He produced the waiver Grant had signed, without reading, acknowledging counsel's recommendation and refusing it. Judge Marwick reviewed it and looked at Grant with the expression of someone watching a grown man blame gravity for a fall. So you were advised, she said. You refused. You signed a waiver. And you signed the agreement in front of this court. Grant's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He turned toward me, eyes wide with a kind of disbelief that almost looked like betrayal. You knew, he whispered. I met his gaze calmly. I ran your books for 11 years, I said. Of course I knew. The judge tapped the papers with a pen. These are debts attached to assets you demanded, she said. Are you telling me you don't know your own financial situation? Silence. Grant's face did something strange. It cycled through anger, panic, humiliation, and finally at last realization. He hadn't been outplayed by me. He'd been outplayed by his own arrogance. I want to withdraw, he said, voice cracking. I didn't understand. This isn't fair. Judge Marwick shook her head. Mr. Halston, you were represented by competent counsel. You declined review. You signed. The agreement stands. The gavel struck. Final. I stood, gathered my purse, and looked at him one last time. You wanted everything, I said quietly, so I made sure you got it. I walked out. In the hallway, I heard Grant's voice rise, blaming Caldwell, blaming me, blaming the universe. Through the glass doors, I saw Sienna's expression change as she listened. Her eyes flicked to Grant, then to his watch, then back to his face. And in that moment, she saw what I'd seen years ago. A man who looked like wealth and sounded like debt. She left before I reached the elevator, heels clicking fast, bag held tight, not looking back. She entered my marriage like a storm and exited it like an accountant. Outside, the air felt cleaner than it had in years. The collapse wasn't dramatic, it was administrative. 2 weeks later, the bank began calling. A month later, the vendors stopped extending credit. 6 weeks later, the city posted a notice regarding unpaid permits. 2 months later, a lien appeared on the house. By the third month, Grant was sitting with bankruptcy attorneys doing the kind of math that doesn't care how charming you are. Celeste tried to rewrite history, of course. She told relatives I must have tricked him, that I must have manipulated the documents, but paperwork doesn't do gossip. His signatures were on everything, his guarantees, his loans, his choices. Then Diane, my closest friend since college, called me crying. Because yes, there was a Diane in my life too. And yes, she had fed Grant information while telling me she just wanted to support me. She left a voicemail begging for forgiveness and claiming she never meant for it to go this far. I didn't call her back. Some people don't deserve a conclusion. They deserve silence. Celeste tried another path, through Eli. She asked him to tell me she was sorry. Eli looked at his grandmother, the woman who supervised my packing like I was disposable, and said, calmly, "My mom isn't collecting apologies. She's building her life." That sentence was worth more than any settlement. A month after the divorce, Eli sat with me in our cobalt kitchen. The one I painted myself. The one that felt like a decision instead of a compromise. You waited, he said. You knew, and you waited. I waited to make sure you were safe, I told him. That was my job. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he hugged me. The real kind of hug. The kind teenagers only give when they mean it. And in that moment, I knew I hadn't just survived. I'd protected what mattered. The cash settlement helped us stabilize. Rent, furniture, groceries that didn't come with guilt. The trust stayed untouched, and I finally did the thing I'd postponed for a decade. I enrolled in certification courses, project management and interior design. Practical, structured, mine. My first client was a woman leaving a long marriage who stood in her empty apartment and whispered, "How do you even start over?" I told her the truth. You start with one room, I said, then one decision, then one day. We painted her kitchen a deep cobalt, she cried. Happy tears, she said. It feels like breathing again. 3 months later, Grant showed up at my door. He looked smaller, not physically, though he'd lost weight, but energetically, like someone had finally removed the costume. No watch, wrinkled shirt, dark circles under his eyes. I didn't know it was that bad, he said. I leaned against the frame and studied him for a long moment. This was the man who'd called me unambitious while I kept his life afloat. This was the man who'd discarded me like clutter. Now he stood in my hallway, with the quiet desperation of someone who wants help but can't bring himself to ask for it. "Can we talk?" he said. I let the silence sit there between us like a mirror. You asked for everything, I said calmly, and you got it. Maya, please. Goodbye, Grant. I closed the door. He stood outside for several minutes. I know because I watched through the peephole while eating ice cream straight from the tub, like a woman who has no intention of making herself smaller ever again. That night, after Eli went to bed, I sat in my living room and looked at a photo of my aunt, the woman who'd left me the inheritance Grant never touched. And I said softly, "You were right. Keep your money separate. Keep your name. Keep your paper trail. And never let someone confuse your quietness with weakness." My life is smaller now, simpler, but it's mine. Every color, every choice, every breath. And for the first time in 16 years, I sleep without feeling like I'm waiting for the floor to collapse, because it already did. And I walked out before it took me with it. Thank you for listening. If you want more stories like this, where patience beats ego, subscribe and click the next video on your screen. The best part is always what they never see coming.